Hi, so today's video is very aptly named. It's called One Hit Wonders, and the reason for that is that I'm going to cover the case histories of 6 individuals that we saw at the Holistic Medical Centre, where there was either one factor alone that was pivotal to this person's recovery, and in other cases it was one factor that was the major factor. So we've got 6 people. In 3 of those instances, there was only one thing that needed to be addressed to turn that person's life right around. And in the other 3 cases, there was one factor, but there were a few other additional factors to address to get that person back on track. So let's get into it, because I'm very excited to share these with you, because they're super simple. Now, the first one is an elderly lady. She came to see us feeling very flat, and she'd been to see her doctor, her GP, who had suggested she go on antidepressants to relieve her of this low mood. She wasn't keen at all. She didn't like to be medicated. She lived alone. She gardened. She had an organic garden and ate lots of vegetables out of that garden. So we explained that we're going to do a few blood tests and look at what we could do for her. And in the meantime, what we did is we went over her diet in detail. And it became apparent very quickly that she was significantly lacking in protein. Now, that's not uncommon with elderly people. They tend to eat lightly, cucumber sandwiches and crackers and what have you, but she was eating a lot of vegetables from her garden, so that was good. So what we suggested is taking a protein powder, because she really didn't want to have a lot of protein in her diet. She didn't feel like her digestion would be comfortable with that, but she was very happy to take a protein powder, so we went that route with her. So she went away. We did her blood tests. She came back 2 or 3 weeks later, and she was amazing. She felt really, really well. The interesting thing is she was very vital. She had energy. The color was in her face. It wasn't just she was animated and happy, but she just was like overall she had much more vitality, and it kind of shone out of her, which was pretty cool. So and interestingly, her bloods, there was nothing to do. Actually, her folate was great because she was eating vegetables, which is very high in folate. She was already taking vitamin D from her doctor, so her vitamin D was fine. Everything else was great. She was getting a lot of minerals, in fact, from her garden, which is great. So she was really thrilled because she felt great, and that was all we actually had to do. Now, protein's a very interesting substance for the body. It's got a number of different actions, and I think the key one in her case was the ability to move nutrition around your body. So when you eat food, you carry the nutrients from the digestive tract into the blood, and then from the blood into the cells, and the carrier for that is protein. So you need those proteins to move nutrients to where the nutrients need to be. So that was one of the things. Also, for your nervous system, there's a lot of substances in your nervous system that the base substances for that are amino acids. So that was one of the stories, and a very lovely, delightful. We saw her twice, and that's all we needed to see her. Now, the next story I'm going to share with you is a lovely young woman who came along with her husband, and she was crying all the time. She just said she felt sad and tearful all the time. So we sort of went over her diet. Her diet was fantastic, really very hard to tweak anything there. There wasn't really much to do on the diet. So we said, okay, well, look, we'll do some blood tests and we'll bring you back. And then we brought her back, and her blood tests were actually across the boards amazing. She didn't need vitamin D. Everything was really good. So we took a bit of a deeper dive to find out and track back when the problem started, and there was a correlation with changing her oral contraceptive pill. So we said, okay, well, look, the contraceptive pill you're taking does have a side effect profile that involves mood changes, so let's change you to a different brand, or you can take a break and use alternative contraception. So that, those are your options. She decided to take a break and just go off the contraceptive pill for a period of time and see how she felt, because she was feeling pretty desperate. and she came back, I think it was a month later, and she felt amazing, and that was it. That's all we had to do. So later she moved on to a different contraceptive pill, and she stayed fine. So that's the second person that had a miraculous transformation just by addressing one factor. So that was another lovely story. The third person that I'm going to cover is again where there was one factor and one factor alone. We had a lovely gentleman come see us with his wife, also a lovely lady, and he had quite severe low mood with a burning tongue. He also had shifting nerve sensations in his fingers and toes. They moved around a bit, and he had a very interesting background. He had gone to his doctor and been put on antidepressants. He'd tried a few different psychiatric medications to relieve these symptoms, and he had had a very severe reaction to the antidepressant, which had put him in hospital, and he had to come off that. And it made him feel quite awful as well, very much more deeply unhappy. So and he had tried everything. He had been to specialists, he had been here, there and everywhere, and a very good friend of his clearly had said, look, I think you need B12. So he gave him some B12 at his house, and for 24 hours this guy felt amazing. The burning tongue went, the shifting sensations, numbnesses and stuff in his fingers and toes, they went, and he felt really happy. He said he could smile, and he said, well, clearly that's a factor. Went back to his doctor and asked for some B12, a B12 shot, because that's you get a nice big dose from a shot. So his doctor said, well, okay, we're gonna test your blood, and the blood test came back in the normal range, but the very low end of the normal range. So B12 in New Zealand at least has a very wide reference range. He was down the bottom end, and he said, well, I'm not going to give you B12 because you're not deficient. So he went to another doctor, got the same response. So when he came to us, he said, please give me some B12. Just give me some B12. That's all I really want. Now B12 it is an actual water-soluble vitamin, so it doesn't accumulate in the body. And so we hadn't really done this before, give a B12 shot to someone who had a normal B12. But we thought, well, it's not going to harm if we get him from the bottom end of the reference range up to the top end of the reference range. It's not going to do much harm. But we watched him carefully. We gave him a shot, and he was thrilled. He was thrilled. So what we did is we measured his B12 again, just a few days after the B12 shot. It went up to 1,000. So that's over the reference range. And then about 3 weeks after that, it came down, and his symptoms came back. So what we found over time is if his B12 was right at the top end of the reference range, about 700, he was fine. If it dropped down, the symptoms came back, and it was a great learning curve for us. And his wife was able to give him the shots, and he carried on, and that was like a remarkable change in this man's life, because he had suffered for quite some time, some years. Now you may wonder why you would get, because they are classic B12 deficiency symptoms, those burning tongue, the numbness, and pins and needles in your fingers and toes, and the kind of a flat mood. So that very classic B12 deficiency symptoms, and yet his B12 was, even though it was low, it was in the normal reference range. Now the reason behind that is a B12 deficiency. What B12 does in your body is it converts to its active form. So you have your normal B12 that you get in the shot and in your food, and then that converts to a different form of B12, which is not actually measured in the blood test. We don't know necessarily how people convert, or how much this other form of B12 is floating around the body. We just don't know, because we don't measure it. But if you are deficient in that other form of B12, in other words, if you're not converting it through very efficiently, what happens is you get a elevation of a substance in the body called methylmalonate. Now that substance is actually the cause of the B12 deficiency symptoms. It has a profound effect on the nervous system, It affects the nerves, and you get these sensations in your fingers and toes, sometimes a burning tongue, and then there's mood changes. So if you measured methylmalonate, that would be a very true indicator of a B12 deficiency. We don't measure that very often. It's not the standard standard test, but if we did, we would see if that is actually a B12. Clearly it wasn't his case, because they all resolved with B12. So that's why you can have a blood test that looks okay, that corresponds with a B12 deficiency picture. And so investigating that aspect and giving like a big dose of B12 in terms of the shot, or you can actually give orally under your tongue the active form of B12, which is called which is actually called methylcobalamin. It's called methylcobalamin because it's got a cobalt molecule in there, but that's what it is. It's active B12, and if you have that picture, you can do that as well. You can buy B12, that active form of B12, in most health food shops. It's quite easily available. So there you go. That's the third case of people. So there you go. That's the third person where we had a dramatic improvement with just addressing one thing. So that's I love that story. That changed that man's life. All right, so on to number 4. Number 4 was a delightful lady that came to us actually for her child. She had a young child and a newborn, and she came with her husband, and the young boy was quite easy to help. They were new to us, but she was really suffering postpartum with low mood, and had problems for quite a while, and also had problems falling pregnant actually. So we were more concerned about her, because the young boy was okay, and like I said, we were able to help him. So what we did is we actually did some blood work on her, and one of the things we checked was a gene test. Now that gene test shows a person's predisposition to folate deficiency. So as I mentioned before with B12, same thing with folate. It converts in the body to its active form, and when that type of folate, it's got a long name, it's called 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, very easily found these days. It's often in B complex supplements. Back then it wasn't. It was quite hard to find. But if you don't make that active form of folate in your body, you have fertility problems, mood problems, things like that. So it's a very, very important nutrient. And that gene came back, that she had a problem converting or predisposition to having issues converting folate through to active folate. Trying to keep it simple here, not get too complicated. So we don't test genes anymore. Genetics are an interesting subject, but a gene can express or not express. That means a gene may turn on or turn off, and whether that gene turns on or turns off really depends on a lot of factors. So testing genetics is not that useful, and tends to be quite distressing for people, because they take it as a cast in stone kind of approach to health, and that's not the case. So anyway, back then we did do this test, and we gave her active folate. These days you would just give that person folate. If you suspected that, you give them the folate. If they improve, then that's great, but going through the whole testing aspect of it is not necessary, because like folate is very easy to find. That form of folate, very easy to find. So she came back and she was feeling great. She'd stopped, she was quite tearful, and she'd stopped crying, and she said, "This has changed my life. I can tell it's changed my life. I feel different. I feel totally different, and this is what's been missing, and I just know it. I know it." She had a great deal of certainty that was a key factor for her. There were a few other things, but she was really interested in this particular nutrient because of the problems. Her sister was having trouble conceiving at that time as well, so she ended up getting her whole family tested. Also, that predisposition that if you're not able to convert your folate through, you can have some cardiovascular problems, and her father had that gene and he did have cardiovascular problems. So she really changed her life. It changed her life and her family's life because they all started taking this and they all started feeling better. So that's a slightly more technical story, but very, very interesting. So these days, keep it simple. Just keep it simple. If there's some problems with heart disease, problems with fertility, problems with mood, just take a ash MTHF. That's usually what you see on a label. About 200 micrograms a day is plenty for any adult. And then with that 200 micrograms of just the plain folic acid. So in total, about 400 micrograms a day of the split dose of those two types of folate is a good way to go for an adult. So yeah, that's another one. All right, person number 5. We had a woman come to us, middle-aged woman, and she was very frightened. She'd had a heart attack, and it has had a very unusual kind of aspect to it, in that she had normal cholesterol, very good cholesterol, and she had none of the profile of a cardiovascular patient. She had no blood sugar problems. She had a normal BMI, so it had confounded somewhat the doctors. They'd given her an angiogram. They'd looked at to see if there was any restriction on blood flow through her heart. That was normal. So her ECGs were normal, her heart rhythms were normal. So they had put it down to an aortic spasm, which is basically like a spasm of the muscular layer of the blood, restricting the blood flow through the heart. So that's what they'd put it down to. And she was really quite terrified. She was on some aspirin, although they said she didn't really need it. They put her on it, and she was terrified of that happening again. So we looked at that, and it turned out also on questioning, she had constant eye twitches, muscle cramps, twitches. When she would go to bed at night, she had restless legs, her muscle cramps, her calves would cramp. So she overall a very strong indicator of a magnesium deficiency. So of course we measured her magnesium, which just is a serum, just a regular blood magnesium, which was normal. Of course that normally is normal. It's very unusual for blood magnesium to change, because your body just takes it from the cells and puts it into the blood. And so your cells become deficient, but your blood stays fairly stable in terms of magnesium. So if you want to check status of magnesium, it's much better to do a red blood cell magnesium test, not just a plain blood test for magnesium. So what we did on the first visit, we just gave her a magnesium supplement, a very, very good quality magnesium supplement. And she came back a couple of weeks later. There were a few other little things to do on her bloods, not very much. And she said all of the twitches had gone, restless legs, the muscle spasms, cramps, and she just felt vastly more relaxed. She was sleeping better, and she was really, really very happy. And she felt a little bit annoyed, because she felt like that was the key factor for her. She was certain, she had complete certainty that the heart attack was related to a magnesium deficiency, swore she would never stop taking it for the rest of her life. And she was happy. She was very happy. She felt like she'd got to the bottom of it, because she also had quite a bit of confusion about there was no cardiovascular disease in her family, that there was nothing that they could find that had caused that, and she felt a little not in control of that situation, because she felt like she was lacking a why. You know, she hadn't found, like, why did this happen to me? So she really, once she found that, she was like really quite happy that she could have some control over her future, and ultimately health that's a big factor of health, having some control over how you do in life and how you feel and your quality of life. and some certainty that you can take some preventative action. So that was patient number 5, and now we're going to do patient number 6. So this young man came to us, a teenage young man, came with his parents, and he had significant problems. He couldn't smile, he couldn't really speak, he was selectively mute, he almost unresponsive to his environment. He was on a host of different psychiatric medications, and no better. And if people spoke to him, he got even more withdrawn. So this was a bit more of a complicated case, but we were really wanting to help this young man. So we did some bloods, and I'm not going to go over all of the detail of what we did. There was quite a lot we did for this young man, but there was a significant, at that point it was the lowest vitamin D level I'd ever seen in at that point probably 10 or 12 years. And in New Zealand we have a reference range of vitamin D that's related to bone health, and that's 50 to 150 nanomoles per litre. So that's the range, 50 to 150, and that you need to be within that range to really prevent soft bones. But there's a lot of research that has suggested that for proper well-being, including blood sugar and good functioning of the nervous system, you need between 70 and 100. It needs to be at that top, more the top end of the range, not the very top. 70 to 100 can definitely provide dramatic improvements. So we really couldn't get, in the first visit, his parents told us, because he wasn't able to communicate with us. And but when we got those bloods back, we got them back for a new visit. From memory, it was something like 17 nanomoles. It was under 20. It was 17 nanomoles. It was pretty not the lowest I've seen now. I've seen even lower than that, but that's pretty low. 17's pretty low. So what we did is we brought him back. We gave him a prescription of vitamin D, and we did a few other things. But within a day, so the vitamin D prescription is 50,000 international units per tablet. So when he came back, we brought him back again in a week because we didn't want to leave it too long, to check in on him again. And he was smiling. He sat down. He was able to speak to us and answer questions. The turnaround was so dramatic. His parents were overjoyed. So now there were a lot of other things we did for this lad, but the vitamin D was one of the key things, and we weren't aware at that point that a vitamin D could become that low. Now this boy didn't go outside. He seemed to be up at night and sleeping in the day, so as if he was a shift worker. And he covered up a lot. So teens do cover up, hoodies and long shirts, long trousers. And he wasn't sporty, so he didn't go to the beach or play sports where he would get access to vitamin D. But that's quite amazing. So the lowest vitamin D, I'm going to just remark here, was an Indian woman, and she stayed out of the sun completely, and her vitamin D was 7. Now I didn't think that was possible. I did not think that was possible, but clearly it is. Now, the darker the skin, the longer the sun exposure is required to get adequate vitamin D. So she, being Indian, her skin was darker, so she needed a lot of sunshine to get the adequate vitamin D, and she really didn't go out very much. So, and when she did, she covered up. So that's something to note for those of you who are curious about vitamin D levels, because it is a fat-soluble vitamin. And it can accumulate, it can become toxic if you take too much, so it's not a good one to take a bit of a guess on. So if you're going to be doing higher doses, definitely test.